When you hear the term, the greatest game of all time, what are some games that come to mind? For a lot of people, it would include the likes of Super Mario 64, The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and even Sonic Adventure 2, depending on who you're asking. The importance that these games had for the gaming industry, as well as for their respective franchises, is not something that's easy to ignore. I'm going to spoil something for you. There is no such thing as a greatest game of all time. What someone considers to be great, another can consider to be unplayable. Everything revolving what's good or what's bad is subjective. It's all a point of view. This is why there has been some pushback regarding these games. Many, myself included, feel as if the games that I mentioned have not withstood the test of time. It could mean that the games themselves haven't aged well, or that current games on the market do what these games did significantly better. I will always have a soft spot in my heart for the likes of Ocarina of Time and Sonic Adventure 2, but I have never felt as if these games were the best in their franchises. Importance or historical significance does not equate quality. It's impossible for these games to live up to the legacy that an entire generation built for them. Many say that these games don't deserve the credit they have, or that they feel overhyped. Surely, it's impossible for games like these to live up to the expectation of them being that good. Or is it? Allow me to ask you one more question. Have you ever played a game that fully lived up to its legacy? There's a common misconception with the Final Fantasy franchise. Many people say that whatever your first Final Fantasy is will be your favorite one. I am living proof that this is not the case. The game that introduced me to this series was none other than Final Fantasy XII on the PlayStation 2. I was always aware of this series, but it was my stepbrother who introduced me to this game. He told me that if I was a fan of the Zelda series, then I would love Final Fantasy. I had Twilight Princess fresh under my belt at the time that Final Fantasy XII came into my library, so I was expecting the game to play like a typical 3D Zelda game. I was in for a rude awakening. I didn't care much for the battle system, I couldn't understand the politics or the lore behind the game, and the license board made no sense to me. There was also the fact that Vaughn didn't make for an interesting protagonist, and the whole setting reminded me a little too much of The Phantom Menace, a movie that's notorious for many things, but many consider the film to be a complete bore. It didn't take long for me to drop the game. I went into the game with expectations that I should not have had. I'm well aware, and I do want to revisit the game soon, but in the end, Final Fantasy XII did not leave a good impression on me for the series. I thought that since I didn't like this one game, that I wouldn't like any games in the series, as if they would all play the same. Once again, I could not have been more wrong. And this is the point where I feel as if I'm going to lose a lot of credibility. Or rather, whatever credibility I ever had to begin with, but everything changed as soon as I got Final Fantasy XIII in my hands. Now, before the game released, I kept seeing advertisements for this game left and right. Everywhere I turned my head, Final Fantasy XIII was right there staring me in the face. Now, I watched video reviews, video trailers, anticipation videos, and the game looked interesting to me. At the time, I recently got my PlayStation 3 with God of War 3 and Bad Company 2, and I needed more games to play, but I wanted to be safe. I rented Final Fantasy XIII at my local Blockbuster, and from the moment I put the disc into my system, I could not put down the controller even if I tried. I'm not sure what it was that grabbed me, but I fell in love with the game, and to this day, I will praise the art direction, the visuals, and most importantly, the soundtrack composed by, and forgive me for butchering his name, Masashi Hamauzu. I do not know how to pronounce that name. I do apologize. But regardless, the soundtrack of this game still resonates with me today. It is a beautiful score, and I can listen to it no matter what kind of mood I'm in. The characters stood out to me as well. The likes of Lightning, Saz, Snow, and Fang were refreshing coming after Final Fantasy XII. Their motives were clear, and their interactions with one another felt human. I'm not expecting much of you to agree with me, but that's just how I feel. I was invested in the world that these characters lived in, and I wanted to see them get their happy ending. I do understand the complaints towards this game, that it's too linear, that the story is convoluted and full of itself, and the combat is mindless for the first several hours. I'm not trying to invalidate the people who are saying these things, I'm simply saying that I was captivated by just about everything else to even notice. When I step back and look at this game, I can agree with most of these complaints that the naysayers have, but once that controller is in my hand, none of that even matters. I'm aware that the majority of the Final Fantasy fandom holds 13 in a negative light, but this was the game that rejuvenated my interest in the series. After playing 13, I went back and played the original, I stumbled upon Final Fantasy IV, and of course, the game in question. I had 3 games for the PlayStation 3 at this point, and I needed something else to play when I would get stuck on a boss in Final Fantasy 13, so I went to the PlayStation Store to see if they had any games for cheap. Lo and behold, Final Fantasy VII was $10. Having nothing to lose, I bought the game, and I didn't think very highly of it after my first taste. I wasn't a fan of how drab Midgar looked, the controls were janky and awkward, the combat didn't really do anything for me, and at the time, the music just wasn't clicking with me. Final Fantasy VII was a game that I picked up and put down shortly afterwards many times. I knew that this game was considered to be one of the best, if not the best Final Fantasy games in the series, but I wanted to see for myself why. In time, unfortunately, this game fell into my massive backlog, and honestly, I even forgot that I owned the game at one point. However, things changed when E3 2015 rolled around and the highly anticipated remake for Final Fantasy VII was announced. At the time, I didn't know this game would take this long to come out, and even at the time of me recording this, we still don't have a release date. But I made it my personal mission to beat this game before that remake can come out, because I wanted to see why people fell in love with this game in its original form, not in a reimagined way. I'm not sure what happened, but once I took this game out of my backlog and started playing it again, I started to warm up to the game slowly but surely, and even though I'm still not the biggest fan of Midgar as a setting, I do have an appreciation for it because it feels lived in. It feels as if there's a history to this place. Things only got better the more I went on, and once when I got to this part, things started to make a bit more sense. Even though this scene shows that this game has aged in a number of ways, I have to admit that this one is pretty cool. First of all, I was always impressed with how many CG cutscenes there are in this game and how in some cases they, at the time anyways, seamlessly transition into gameplay. This game's opening is the first thing that comes to mind. It is admittedly distracting when there are CG cutscenes that have the proportionate character models in some, in the chibi polygonal models in others. And for the record, if you're going to be playing the original PlayStation version or the PS3 port on an HD TV, then I recommend playing a drinking game. Take a shot of your favorite drink for every pixel that you can count on the screen. In all seriousness, playing this on a big TV does not do the game any justice at all. If you want to play a version of the game with a clearer picture, then I'd recommend the Steam or the PlayStation 4 ports. More on those later. But this scene in particular stood out to me. It's so try-hard that it ends up being both cool and cheesy at the same time. I have no idea how I'm supposed to take this situation. Do I take it seriously, or is it trying to be goofy and over the top, or what? Either way, it always gets a positive reaction out of me, for better or for worse. To be fair, even when playing this game for the first time, this was something I've always appreciated. There are stakes, and this game does take itself seriously, but it also knows when to ease up and to have a little fun here and there. I'll point you to the cross-dressing cloud scenario any day of the week. Seeing Aeris threaten to rip off someone's penis will always be one of the funniest scenes in any video game I have ever played. You know, actually, let's put a pin on Aeris right now. I have more to say about her, but I'll save that for later. But back at the topic at hand, Cloud rides down a flight of stairs on a motorcycle, and Tifa, Aeris, Barret, and a talking dog steal a car to break out of the Shinra building, only to be chased down the highway by Shinra soldiers, and then you get to the end of the highway and have to fight a giant robot with spikes that shoots out fire! Tell me that is not one of the coolest things ever. What surprised me on my first playthrough is that you actually get to play out the chase scene. You ride your motorcycle and the Shinra soldiers attack the car that your party members are in. Each time an enemy attacks your car, your party's health decreases, and what you have left when you reach the end of the chase is what you have to deal with when fighting the boss. There are even more of these kind of minigames sprinkled across the 3 discs, and while they are rough around the edges, I can't help but be impressed that Squaresoft was able to cram in so much content in this game without having the PlayStation explode. At the moment, I've yet to play Final Fantasy VIII or IX, but from what I've been told, those games add even more stuff to do. Now, granted, they are sequels, so that's to be expected, but either way, I'm awed by how much they were able to put in these games given the limitation of the system. After you escape Midgar, you take your first step into the open world, and it was from here on out that convinced me to see this game through to the very end. It's true that from this point forward, the gameplay is more like a traditional JRPG. You explore the overworld, you fight in random encounters, you go to towns, go to dungeons, etc. For some, this could be seen as a disappointment because Midgar, by Final Fantasy standards and even JRPG standards, was unique for its time. Some say that if the game had a more grounded and focused story that just revolved around Midgar and not Gaia, the name of the planet that Final Fantasy takes place in, the game would have had a more interesting and compelling narrative thanks to its unique setting. While I can understand this point of view, I could not disagree more. Part of the fun of these kinds of games is exploring the world to its fullest, doing side quests, going after optional bosses, playing minigames and whatnot. If the setting of Final Fantasy VII was just Midgar, then we would have missed out on so many memorable locations like Cosmo Canyon, the Gold Saucer, Rocket Town, and the City of the Ancients, just to name a few. The world of Final Fantasy VII is packed to the brim with so much to do and so much to see that it would be a waste to have the game locked to just one setting. And thanks to this game for having a number of memorable and iconic locations, I found it intriguing to see how these towns were affected after crucial plot points. Hands down, my favorite place to go to in this game would be the Gold Saucer. This is a place where you can go to relax and play a few minigames if you really feel like it. You'll be coming here a few times in the main story, and depending on your actions, you can score yourself a date with Aeris, Tifa, Yuffie, and even Barret. Aeris and Tifa's dates are played out more seriously, but Yuffie's and Barret's dates are hilarious. I have always loved these kinds of places in JRPGs. From Toby from Golden Sun to the Game Corner in Pokemon, they're fun little diversions from the main story that can nab you some pretty valuable items and equipment. The best part is that the further you get into the story, the more minigames you unlock for the Gold Saucer. Also, I have no idea how this basketball minigame works. I've always had a hard time with it, but for some reason while I was recording, I was able to get 10 shots in a row. I know it involves timing of your button presses, but I can never get the rhythm down. Even now, I still have no idea how it's supposed to work. The point of what I'm trying to say is that once when I left Midgar, I got so addicted to this game, to the point where I actually had to go out and buy a PSP, so that way I'd be able to play this game at any time, anywhere, and it's hands down one of the best purchases I have ever made. Actually, I think this game benefits from being played on the PSP. The spongy D-pad makes it comfortable when moving the characters around. Now granted, this doesn't fix the clunky controls, but it does soften the blow, or rather, it makes it less noticeable. Plus, there's the portability aspect. Being able to play this game on the go is always nice. And this is also kind of a side tangent, but the way he can mod the PSP to get emulators running so you can play even more JRPGs. You know, you can play Final Fantasy 1 through 9, any of the Pokemon games, Golden Sun games, Secret of Mana 2, Chrono Trigger, Mother 3. Now, I don't want to get too carried away, but damn, I love this thing. As you progress through the story, you explore new areas and the characters in your party will go through character arcs, so that way we learn more about their past and why they want to stick it to Shinra. If I'm being honest, this is one of my favorite casts in any RPG that I have ever played. Barret is one of my favorite characters in this game. Some criticize him for his foul language being interpreted with random symbols, and some would go as far to say that his portrayal is a racist stereotype given his animations. The way I see it, the animations are a byproduct of the PlayStation's limitations. The console wasn't powerful enough for games like these to have facial animations. I'm aware that the Crash Bandicoot games have pretty decent facial animations considering the console it was released on, but those games are not nearly as plot heavy as something like Metal Gear Solid, for example. It would be impossible for any of the Final Fantasy games to have facial animations given how story intensive they are. The body animations compensate for the lack of facial animations, and 9 times out of 10 they get the point across. And if I'm being honest, I'm going to miss them in the remake. I'm not sure what it is, but these animations have a kind of charm to them that I can't exactly put into words. What makes Barret such an appealing character in my eyes is that he's willing to do anything and everything for his adopted daughter Marlene. It's a common trope in most Japanese forms of media, well, in most forms of media around the world, to be fair, where the parents are dead, or the mother is single because the father died, or he ran away because he's a bad husband and a bad father, or maybe the father's an evil, typical abusive type, or an evil, abusive stepfather. In my memory, there aren't many father figures in these kinds of games, so it is refreshing to see one like Barret. Now, that's not to say that there aren't any at all, but it is something I'd like to see more. And of course, I have to mention Aeris. Her death is one of the most well-known plot twists in any video game. It might even be one of the more well-known ones in fiction, period. It's like knowing that Darth Vader is Luke's father. Nowadays, it's hard to be shocked or even feel anything because we see it coming from a mile away. It's almost like as if it's common knowledge at this point. But somehow, by some weird Squaresoft magic, it happened. First of all, I wasn't expecting to like Aeris as much as I did. When I was introduced to the character, it was through the Kingdom Hearts games. I knew where she was from, but I didn't know who she was. The Kingdom Hearts games paint her out to be an angelic, peaceful, pure maiden, and I was expecting her to be the same in Final Fantasy VII. Nothing was farther from the truth. She's outgoing, fun-loving, threatening to rip off another man's genitals, and she tries her hardest to get Cloud to come out of his shell. And funnily enough, I never realized how much of a tease she was until this playthrough that I recorded for this video. She teases Cloud in front of Tifa, aches Cloud to go on a date with her multiple times. She peeks at Cloud while he's changing into his dress. She laughs, she cries. I was not expecting her to act like this at all, but here she is, threatening to rip off another man's junk. She makes jokes, she knows when to have fun and when to take things seriously, and even though she requests Cloud to be her bodyguard, she proves time and time again that she's perfectly capable of handling herself. And yes, I did use her in my party. She acts as this game's white mage, and I typically like to have a dedicated healer in these types of games. Now, granted, these kinds of characters don't hit very hard at all, but I've always loved the way how Aeris attacks. She just launches herself right into the enemy. She doesn't care. I can't be the only one who finds this animation hilarious, right? And I admit, starting out, I had her in my party purely for her use as a healer, not necessarily because I liked her. But this character grew on me so fast that a part of me even forgot that she was going to die by the end of the first disc. We even went on a date at the Gold Saucer, and the moment where Cloud and Aeris act out a play will always be one of my favorite moments of this game. And when the time finally came, I admit, I teared up. I knew it was coming, I told myself it wouldn't be that bad, but it happened. I shed a tear. I genuinely felt like as if I lost someone important. And even now, watching this scene, it never gets easier, but something else happened that made me tear up even more, but I'll talk about that later on. Even though Aeris is one of my favorite characters in any RPG I've ever played, my favorite character in this game, and really one of my favorite characters of all time, is hands down Yuffie. First off, playing this game for the first time, I stumbled into her while exploring some woods. I was caught off guard when I had to fight her. She didn't put up much of a fight, and she joined my party soon enough. I was surprised to find out that she's technically an optional character when I found her, and to find out that I didn't even mess up the dialogue options. I mean, talk about beginner's luck, am I right? She's spontaneous and has a leap before you look attitude that I've always found charming. She's stubborn and is often forced into situations where she makes it clear that she's uncomfortable being in, but in the end, she always powers through. I've always found that admirable, and she often brought some light in some of the game's more darker moments. Granted, I think she is a great character on her own merits, but the reason why I like her so much isn't necessarily just for her character, but more so for how she impacted my first time experience while playing the game. I was exploring the City of the Ancients and found something called an Aqua Ring. I had Yuffie and Tifa in my party, so I gave the ring to Yuffie because she didn't have any accessories equipped at the time. Then came the moment where Aeris died, and I had to fight the boss that followed after. Little did I know the boss had nothing but water attacks, and powerful ones at that. The boss was quick to take out Cloud and Tifa, but no matter how much it tried, it could not land a hit on Yuffie. If she didn't outright dodge the attack, she absorbed them and recovered health thanks to the Aqua Ring I gave her. In time, the boss ran out of magic and was relegated to a sitting duck. So I revived my party members, and it was only a matter of time before we took it down. Aerith's death had me a little shaken up. That damn music wasn't helping, but I was slowly coming to grips with what had happened. And then this happened. I had no idea the party members would react to her death. And after all we've been through, to see a character that I grew attached with die right in front of our eyes, and then have another one break down crying and running away, and that damn song would not let up. Damn you, Nobuo Uematsu, damn you and your talent. I couldn't help it. I cried. Not just one tear. I straight up cried like a little girl. Even though I knew what was going to happen, when it was going to happen, how it was going to happen, by all means, I should not have had the kind of emotional response that I did, but at the end of the day, these characters were so fleshed out. They were wonderful people, and I got slammed by an emotional truck when Aerith died. How the game managed to make me feel the way I did while being fully aware at the same time is incredible. Fast forward towards the halfway point of the second disc. Aerith is dead, Cloud is mentally messed up, and Tifa leaves the party to help Cloud recover. I was forced to use two other characters I wasn't used to. Thankfully, I still had Yuffie, until I accidentally stumbled upon Wutai and she abandoned my party while taking all of my hard-earned materia with her. Now I was completely out of my element. It was legitimately unsettling for me, and I did everything I could to get her back. I ran around Wutai trying to figure out where the hell she ended up, and even when I found her, she pulls a prank on my other party members and just runs off. Shortly afterwards, I found out that she was kidnapped alongside a Turk member named Elena by none other than Don Cornello. I explored the Wutai Mountains and rescued her from Cornello, and she rejoined my party, and things were finally starting to feel right. And of course, in time, I would eventually get Cloud and Tifa back in my party, and all was right in the world, and I was able to comfortably tackle a decent chunk of this game's optional content, like getting the character's ultimate weapons and getting Vincent. Yeah, to my embarrassment, I found Vincent pretty late into the game, by like the third disc. Now let's fast forward all the way to the final boss. He was giving me a hard time, as expected. The fight was going on far longer than I originally anticipated. He kept confusing my team, turning them into frogs, taking away their ability to use magic, and he kept spamming that supernova move, and I cannot skip it and swear. It's cool the first time, but if you keep spamming it, it's not fun. It's boring. So what does Yuffie do? She deals the final blow with her final limit break, and after all that I've been through with her, that was satisfying as all hell. So you may have noticed that I've gone all this time talking about the stories and the characters and what they mean to me and my experiences with them, but I really haven't talked about how this game plays, and that's really because there's not that much to talk about when it comes to mechanics. It's a turn-based JRPG with an active time battle system, meaning that you have to wait for this little meter over here to fill up before you can make your next move. If there's any feature that defines Final Fantasy VII, it would have to be the materia system. The small orbs that, when equipped, grant you special attacks, magic, abilities, and even summons are relegated to being materia. Each weapon and each piece of gear that you find will have materia slots for you to fill, and depending on which kind you put in, will increase or decrease your stats. You level up your materia to unleash even more powerful attacks so long as you have them equipped to a party member. As you fight in battles, you gain experience points and level up like in a typical RPG, but this is also how your materia levels up as well. Some aren't too difficult to level up. The basic elemental materia, cure, life, bio, fire, those didn't take too terribly long from my experience. But I've seen what people had to go through to level up the enemy skill materia, and frankly, it doesn't seem worth it unless you go after this game's optional super bosses. I will say this, I am grateful that the battle mechanics aren't too difficult to understand. You get a total of 8 characters to join you on your journey, but you can only have 3 members at a time, with Cloud being mostly mandatory. Thankfully, it doesn't matter who you have in your party, it really just boils down to which character you like the most, or whose limit break you prefer. Once you've taken enough damage, your limit meter will fill up, and when it does, you can unleash a devastating attack upon your opponents, or buff up your party members. Each character has 4 levels of limit breaks, and 3 of the 4 levels have 2 limits each. In order to get to the next level, you have to either kill or use the limit a certain amount of times. Outside of combat, there really isn't a whole lot to talk about when it comes to its core gameplay. You explore the world, you solve light puzzles as you make your way throughout the 3 discs, plus with those multiple gameplay diversions that I mentioned previously. Now, personally, I find it disappointing that the gameplay isn't as involved as I hope, but at the very least, I am grateful that it's not convoluted and it is easy to understand. I'll come out and admit that I have not experienced everything this game has to offer. I played through the main quest and did some optional side content along the way. It's only when I take a step back from the game and realize that aside from its story and minigames, you really are just going from place to place. Now, to be fair, a lot of JRPGs do this, and at the same time, I don't think it's an issue provided that the story and the characters are the focus and that they're well developed. But at the same time, it's kind of a bummer to know that in terms of its gameplay, aside from its battles, it wasn't all that involving. I will admit that running around these pre-rendered environments is pretty cool. It almost feels like as if it's an interactive painting. But for one, the controls are too difficult to get used to due to how stiff they are, and 2, it doesn't always do a good job of showing you where you need to go. I am grateful that there is an option that highlights your character and the exits that point you to the direction where you need to be heading, but actually getting there can be frustrating. I want to bring up another RPG that I hold in high regard, and at this point you all know what it is. It's Golden Sun, of course. I'm gonna talk about this game way more than I should. In my eyes, Golden Sun is almost the exact opposite of Final Fantasy VII. Golden Sun has a large number of dungeons that have Zelda-like elements to them, but on the flip side, the story, while it is interesting in some parts, is standard at best. It's run-of-the-mill. Story and character developments are the clear priorities in Final Fantasy VII, and I was let down that the gameplay, while not bad in any stretch, just wasn't anything mind-blowing. Now, I'm not docking off points for the game for it not being something that I assumed it would. I'm just stating my preference. I'd rather an RPG play more like Golden Sun than Final Fantasy VII, but then again, please take this into consideration. This is purely from a gameplay perspective. Now, with all of that said, there is one thing about the battles that do bother me. When you have a random encounter, and yes, they are in this game, the screen pulls off a nice nifty special effects and it rotates the camera around the battlefield, then you and your characters fade into the battlefield along with your enemies. Now, if this was just for the bosses, it'd be fine, but the problem is that this happens every time you bump into an enemy, and as a result, I feel as if this game's pacing suffers because of it. Now, I know this isn't a fair comparison, but with something like Golden Sun and even Persona 5, in order to be more topical, you get into an encounter and then bam, you're ready to go just like that. No need for a long-winded transition, you just jump into the action, then you kick ass. It has a better flow and it makes the battles feel faster as a result. There is an option to increase the battle speed, so I will give credit where credit is due, but once when I got to the final area of the game, I honestly just wanted the game to end because of how frequent the gameplay was being interrupted. I do have an understanding on why they would want to make the battle transitions like this. It was Square's first RPG using 3D models and they wanted to show it off. This was also the most expensive game to make for its time and they wanted to milk it for all it's worth. I get it. Hell, I see it with how many CG cutscenes there are in this game. Now, from what I understand, the software that they use for the CG is the same one that major Hollywood movies used at the time. But when I'm playing this game, when I already have a number of RPGs under my belt, I start to see where the game has aged in some areas. Lastly, I will say this, to give credit where credit is due. This game is mostly lax when it comes to grinding. I could think of maybe 2 bosses throughout the entire main quest where I had to stop and grind for a little bit, but generally speaking, as long as you fight most of your battles, you'll be good to go. Now, if you're going through the main quest, you'll be fine, but once we start going after the super bosses on the other hand, yeah, you may need some help. Here's a fun little story for you. Later in the game, you get a submarine, and with it, you can explore the depths of the ocean to find some hidden items and areas. This is also where you can find one of the optional super bosses, and seeing this thing for the first time in the dark scared me something fierce. Seriously, I can't even begin to describe how terrified I was when I first saw this thing. It's just, look at it, man, that's fucking terrifying! Now I want to ask the question that I asked in the very beginning. Have you ever played a game that fully lived up to its legacy? I speak for myself when I can confidently say no. No, I have not. Final Fantasy VII, as much as I love this game, has aged significantly in a number of ways. The controls are stiff, the pacing is sloppy, and the localization, while mostly solid, can be pretty shoddy from time to time. Can I, at the very least, recommend this to newcomers for the series? That is a little difficult to say. I would recommend, at the very least, you get some of the 2D Final Fantasies under your belt before tackling this one. 4, in my opinion, is a solid starting point, but I've heard nothing but great things about Final Fantasy V and 6, so maybe those aren't bad places to start either. Once when you become more familiar with those games, then I'd recommend that you give 7 a shot. You can find this game on Steam and on the PlayStation Store for your PS3 and for your PS4, but the version on the PS4 is a port of the Steam version. Now, if you're extremely adamant on making this your first Final Fantasy, then I would say get this version. If you're stuck on a hard boss battle, then there's an option that autofills your limit gauge, and I do believe there is an option that automatically refills your health. So if you want to experience just the story of Final Fantasy VII and not have to deal with the random battles, by the way, there is also an option to turn off random encounters in this version, then go right ahead. The game isn't badly priced for this 40-hour-long JRPG. But even with all of that said, while I never believed that this was the greatest game ever made or if it was the greatest JRPG of all time, this was the first game that made me go, yeah, I can see why people say that. Now again, this game has aged in a number of areas, but its imagery, its music, its story, the characters, to me, those are timeless. For context, when I started playing this game, I was around maybe 16, 17 years old, and then when I beat the game, I was 21 years old. I'm just letting you know this game was on my backlog for a very long time. While the translation was a bit rocky, the story gripped me tighter than any story of any RPG that I've ever played, and I'm saying that with plenty of other RPGs under my belt right now. I wanted to get to the end because I wanted to see these characters get their happy ending. I was able to see what people saw when they played this game the day it came out. And at the time of this video, I am currently 22. Clearly, there is something in this game that is special. There will be something here for you if you like JRPGs. Now, while this isn't my favorite JRPG of all time, this one made me understand the legacy it left behind on the industry.